which are, in a very elementary sense, is this working or is it not working?
Yeah.
Is it good culturally or is it problematic culturally, right? Oftentimes we think that encouraging people to share and collaborate is a good thing.
Yeah.
But there are other situations where sharing and collaboration is a bad thing, particularly in the business world, right? So, antitrust law and unfair competition law mean that sharing is, sharing certain kinds of information can be problematic. Even in a more social setting, sometimes sort of community sharing and community collaboration might be productive and useful, but it can also be very tribal and exclusionary, and you have to be careful to weigh sort of different aspects of the group and the positive sense. Is this working or is it not working?
Yeah.
Is it good culturally or is it problematic culturally, right? Oftentimes we think that encouraging people to share and collaborate is a good thing.
Yeah.
But there are other situations where sharing and collaboration is a bad thing, particularly in the business world, right? So, antitrust law and unfair competition law mean that sharing is, sharing certain kinds of information can be problematic. Even in a more social setting, sometimes sort of community sharing and community collaboration might be productive and useful, but it can also be very tribal and exclusionary, and you have to be careful to weigh sort of different aspects of the group and the positive and negative aspects of the group, and it's important to come up with some criteria. So you don't want to be just casually saying this is good and this is bad. We need to have a way of measuring.
And can you tell me more about other sort of, how has sort of this framework been used in other contexts? Is there like resources we can turn to sort of see how other people have applied this kind of strategy?
Yes. So one set of resources to see how it works is to look at the material that we were inspired by when we came up with this 10 years ago. So this idea of collaboration institutions that we call commons is initially associated with Elinor Ostrom. Ostrom was a political scientist and economist at Indiana University. She won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2009, and she spent her whole career, and all of her colleagues and students built up careers around studying collaboration mechanisms for natural resources. So fisheries, forests, grazing systems, water systems, pretty much any kind of natural resource. She was really interested in how people collaborate to manage it. Brett and Kathy and I were the first people to really do a systematic sort of repurposing of that work, but put it into practice in the information and knowledge domain. So in terms of illustrations that anyone could look at, we published a paper in 2009 on colleges and universities. So the idea is that a university or a college is a formal institution to store knowledge and share knowledge through research and teaching. But the interesting thing about any university is a very complicated space, but the interesting thing about them is that most of the time, most of the faculty and students in a university are engaged in different kinds of knowledge sharing with each other rather than knowledge exclusivity, right? Colleges and universities don't work very well if people are trying to hold on to private property rights and things that they think and produce. So we wrote a whole paper about that, and I'm in the process of turning that into a book. We have, since then, we've produced two books that are both edited collections of case studies of knowledge commons, or what in the original paper we called them constructed cultural commons. That's kind of a mouthful. So we simplified it, so now we call them knowledge commons. But we have two books. The first book, which was in 2014, was very diverse in terms of the types of things that we and the contributors wrote about. So there's some stuff in there about medical research. I wrote a paper about astrophysics research. There's something in there about Flickr and online photo sharing. Mm-hmm. There's a paper about journalism, particularly older journalism. There's a paper about innovation on the battlefield in the military. There's a paper in there about roller derby and how roller derby and the revival of roller derby depends very heavily on a lot of shared knowledge production.
Definitely interesting.
Yeah, so you really get a sense that this applies in science, it applies in art and culture, it applies in modern life, it applies to older contexts as well. The idea was to be very broad that way.
What's the name of the collection that you're talking about? This last one, the one that has.
The 2014 book is Governing Knowledge Commons, and it's published by Oxford University Press. Cool. You can find it on Amazon. It's got 14 case studies and then an updated version of the article from 2010 and some context that explains how what we're doing now with Knowledge Commons relates to what I mentioned about Eleanor Ostrom and the other work that she had done before.
Now, how does the work that you're doing, how does it relate to the concept that there's a number of articles on called about negative space in intellectual property? How does the commons, what's the difference between negative space and the commons?
So the negative space literature has sort of there's three pieces of it that are worth noticing. So one part of the negative space literature basically says that in this community, people do not rely on formal intellectual property rights, but they rely on customary practices that are substitutes for formal intellectual property rights. So it's a kind of, you get the virtues of exclusivity for what you've created, but you don't have the same kind of costs that a formal IP system imposes. So that part of the negative space literature, that's mostly, in my view, just sort of standard stories of IP, but without the formal law.
Got it. And so an example of that is like what? Like
I would think that stuff? Like the Sprigman work on comedy is sort of in that genre, right? Stand-up comics like to have exclusivity in their jokes, but they don't like to sue each other. Right. Okay,
so they're not relying on the mechanism of copyright in the sense of like registering their works and going to court and doing cease and desist notices. They're doing something else.
Right. So there's a second genre of the negative space literature, which is much more similar to what we're talking about with the commons stuff, because the second genre of negative space literature is there's some shared resource pool. And, there's a set of social norms and customs in the community that are designed to manage this shared resource pool. And maybe there's a little bit of exclusivity associated with it, but maybe not. But it really has a different, more collaborative affect to it than the typical IP system does. So, an example of this, let me see a good example of that. The roller derby business, Dave Fagundes' work on roller derby social norms is kind of an example of this, right? Where there's not a lot of formal IP claims associated with the creative work that goes on among roller derby participants. And there's a lot of motivation to share resources to help keep that enterprise going. The work that Aaron Perzanowski and Dave Fagundes are doing right now on clowns,
right.
I think that is somewhat in this more collaborative space. Mm-hmm. But there's not a hard and fast distinction between Category 1 and Category 2. Right. But I do think that the negative space literature sort of combines pieces of both. Yeah. The third thing to know about the negative space literature, and I think this is the most important, is that every one of these negative space papers or books that I've seen, whether it's, comics, magicians, or chefs, or graffiti artists, or Zar Saeed is doing the paper on craft brewing names right now.
Everybody thinks that that's the best project that we all should have been doing, right? The idea that you have to...
what were we thinking? Why are they doing clowns? We all should be drinking beer.
That's right. Choose your project wisely.
As rich as these papers often are, there's a lot of great detail in these papers. The problem with them is that every person doing one of these projects has started with a different set of research questions and not necessarily a set of shared systematic research questions. So it's very difficult to compare case study A to case study B to case study C.
Right.
So you've got magicians, you've got comics, you've got beer, you've got clowns, you've got graffiti, you've got these other things. But what do you do with it as a pool of research? Because there's no way to do productive comparing and contrasting in a systematic way.
So if we wanted to do that, so one of the things we're doing, obviously we're doing quilting, but we're also doing cosplay, and we're doing, there's like 4 projects we're doing right now. Photographs, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of stuff we're doing. If we were going to try to do it across the, like if as part of our course for the copyright class, if we were going to start to think about these in more systematic ways, how do we do that? Like, have you developed a resource that we have the article, but are there resources to think through how to design the questions so they could be asked in any cultural environment? Yes.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So you're absolutely right that this is a barrier to participation.
Yeah.
Right. So asking somebody to read a 60-page law review article and then put that into practice is hard. So
yes,
we have a website. So the website is knowledge-commons.net. And so all of the papers and books are available there. But one of the things that we have at the website is basically a 2-pager. So if you want a cheat sheet that says, here are the clusters of questions to keep front and center.
Yeah.
There's a 2-page document that we've created that basically says, here, we're not going to script the language for you, and you can obviously adapt that. And it doesn't matter too much what sequence you go in terms of the clusters of questions. But here's a very easy to start with Roman 1, Roman 2, Roman 3, Roman 4, sub A, sub B, sub A, sub B template.
Mm-hmm.
An expert researcher could use, whether they're a lawyer or an economist or a psychologist or a historian.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually simple enough that a thoughtful law student could pick it up and take a first crack at a brand new case. It's really designed to be accessible and usable without a lot of detailed training at the front end, because we think of ourselves as a kind of commons community of our own, right? Multiple researchers using this set of questions and this instrument to grow a community of research. And
cool. So I'm at your website right now. Where would I find it? Is it on the, do you have any idea?
Hang on, let me.
And I'll put it on
it up on my screen.
Oops.
So if you just scroll down.
Okay.
Boom, 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 boom. Where would I find this? Where have I just redesigned this over the summer. Hang on a second.
So when you're looking for it, so my vision is that, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, it's actually at the top under introduction.
Okay.
So you see there's a little YouTube video that's right there at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then there's 1, 2, 3 full paragraphs. And then it says the following 2 resources are excellent starting points.
Yeah. Is it the starting point?
Right. So there's 2 links.
Okay. Got them.
Right. So link number 1 is a 4-page summary of the whole idea. And link number 2 is a schematic and
Love it.